It began like any other journey, a commercial flight bound across continents, carrying men, women, and children who believed that in just a few hours they would be stepping onto another shore. The aircraft, a wide-bodied twin-engine jet known as Skyline Airways Flight 218, stood gleaming under the night sky. Passengers boarded with quiet anticipation, unaware that they were stepping into a mystery that would one day captivate the entire world. The cabin lights glowed softly as the engines hummed to life. It was a moment so routine, so perfectly normal, that no one could have imagined what was to come. Flight 208 was scheduled to depart from Meridian International Airport, a modern hub buzzing with the sounds of departures and arrivals. The captain, an experienced aviator with more than 15,000 flight hours, had flown this route dozens of times. His first officer was equally skilled, calm and precise in every motion. Together, they reviewed weather reports, flight paths, and routine checklists, their voices steady and professional. Outside, the night was clear, an ideal night for flying. At 11:42 p.m., the aircraft rolled down the runway, its engines roaring against the dark silence. Families waved from the terminal windows as the jet lifted off, climbing gracefully into the night sky. Inside, passengers settled into their seats, some closing their eyes to rest, others scrolling through their phones, watching a movie, or chatting softly with seatmates. The flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, their smiles genuine, their movements efficient. For the first 40 minutes, nothing seemed unusual. It was by all accounts a textbook flight. But somewhere high above the ocean, as the plane crossed into its next airspace boundary, something changed. The radar blip that represented Flight 208 flickered once on the screen of an air traffic controller, then disappeared. At first, it seemed like a minor glitch, a routine signal handover between regions, something that happened occasionally. Controllers waited for the aircraft to reappear, expecting a transponder signal to return. It didn't. They tried to make radio contact. Silence. No response. They repeated the call again. Still nothing. In aviation, silence is never a good sign. When a pilot doesn't answer, it triggers a chain reaction of concern. Within minutes, multiple control centers were trying to establish contact. Nearby aircraft were asked to relay messages, hoping that perhaps Skyline 218's crew could hear even if their transmitter had failed. But the ocean was vast, and there was only silence. The flight that had been confidently gliding toward its destination had vanished. Its location unknown, its fate uncertain. Back on the ground, the families of the passengers remained blissfully unaware. They were tracking the flight through apps, watching its slow progress across the map. Some were planning surprise airport welcomes. Others were preparing late-night dinners for loved ones returning home. Hours passed. Then, news broke that the aircraft was overdue. First came confusion, then disbelief. It's probably just a delay, some thought. Maybe a communication problem. But as dawn approached, hope gave way to dread. The plane wasn't just delayed, it was missing. Authorities acted swiftly. Search and rescue operations were launched from multiple nations. Dozens of ships, aircraft, and satellites were mobilized to scour the suspected crash zones. The first priority was to locate the last known coordinates. But that's where the mystery deepened. The plane hadn't been where it was supposed to be. Its last recorded signal was hundreds of miles from its intended flight path. Experts couldn't understand how such a deviation could occur without any distress signal. Even if there had been a system failure, pilots were trained to communicate emergencies. The silence was unnatural. Day turned into night, and night into day. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath the search teams, glimmering under the sun, hiding its secrets beneath vast depths. Small pieces of debris found in early days gave rescuers false hope, but none matched the aircraft's specifications. It was as if the plane had simply dissolved into the air. Satellite companies were asked to review every pixel of their recorded data from that night, looking for the faintest signs of a heat trail or explosion. There were none. It was the kind of disappearance that seemed impossible in an age where every move on Earth is tracked, logged, and analyzed. The families were brought into briefing rooms, where officials tried to explain what little they knew. The walls were covered in maps and radar diagrams, lines tracing possible flight paths, circles marking probable crash zones. Journalists crowded outside, their cameras capturing the tears, the frustration, and the questions that no one could yet answer. How can a plane vanish in the modern age? One father asked, his voice trembling. How can 239 people just disappear? The days that followed were filled with speculation. Some believed the plane had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Others whispered about hijacking, electrical fires, even deliberate acts. The lack of evidence only fed the uncertainty. Satellite data eventually revealed faint handshakes, automated signals exchanged between the aircraft and satellites hours after radar contact was lost. This meant the plane might have continued flying for hours after it vanished from radar. But where had it gone? Why had it changed direction? Those questions remained unanswered. Investigators pieced together possible flight paths using advanced mathematical models and ocean drift analysis. Vast search areas were drawn across remote parts of the Southern Ocean, regions so isolated that few ships ever passed through them. Deep-sea scanning vessels began mapping the ocean floor, looking for any trace of wreckage. The technology used was cutting-edge. Sonar imaging, autonomous underwater drones, and magnetic sensors, all working together to find anything. But the ocean is a cruel keeper of secrets. For months, the search turned up nothing but endless silence and cold, dark water. The story of Flight 208 became a global obsession. Television channels aired 24-hour coverage. Experts debated theories. Families pleaded for truth. Governments offered updates, sometimes conflicting, sometimes painfully vague. Conspiracy theories flooded the internet, each one more unbelievable than the last. But behind the noise, the real tragedy was human. There were mothers, fathers, and children on that flight. Ordinary people who had simply boarded a plane, never imagining their names would one day become part of a mystery that defied explanation. Among the passengers were engineers, students, artists, and travelers. Some were returning home after months abroad. Others were heading to new beginnings. Their stories began to emerge through news interviews and social media. A couple on their honeymoon, a scientist en route to a global conference, a child traveling for the first time. Each story added another layer of heartbreak. For their loved ones, the uncertainty was unbearable. Without wreckage, there were no answers. Without answers, there was no closure. Meanwhile, investigators were under immense pressure. Aviation experts from around the world joined forces, analyzing every possible scenario. They reconstructed radar data, engine signals, and communication logs. They examined the backgrounds of the crew, the maintenance history of the plane, and even the cargo it carried. Every detail mattered. Yet, despite the most sophisticated investigation in history, nothing conclusive emerged. It was as if Flight 208 had slipped through the cracks of reality itself. Months passed. The official search was expanded further south into the ocean, covering areas never before mapped in detail. Specialized vessels scanned the seabed thousands of meters below, their sonar waves painting ghostly images of underwater mountains and trenches. Occasionally, search teams thought they had found something significant, a metallic reflection, a strange formation. But when inspected closely, it turned out to be nothing more than geological features or discarded shipping containers. Each false alarm felt like a heartbreak all over again. Then, small pieces began to appear. A fragment of an aircraft wing washed ashore on a remote island thousands of miles from the original search zone. Investigators confirmed it belonged to Skyline Flight 208. For the first time, there was physical proof that the plane had indeed gone down. But even this discovery raised new questions. How had the debris drifted so far? Was the crash site farther than anyone had imagined? The ocean currents offered partial explanations but not certainty. The deeper the investigation went, the wider the mystery became. As the months turned into years, the world began to move on, but the families couldn't. Memorials were built, ceremonies held, and moments of silence observed, yet the absence of truth left a wound that refused to heal. For many, it wasn't just the loss of loved ones, it was the loss of trust in the systems that were supposed to keep them safe. Aviation, once a symbol of progress and connection, suddenly felt fragile, unpredictable, and deeply human again. Experts used the tragedy to push for changes in flight tracking technology. New rules were introduced, ensuring that aircraft would transmit their positions more frequently, even over remote oceans. Satellite tracking systems were upgraded to provide real-time data. Engineers designed black boxes capable of floating and transmitting distress signals. The world had learned a painful lesson, that even in the age of technology, there are still blind spots in the sky. But for the story of Skyline 208, the ending remains unwritten. Somewhere deep beneath the waves lies the final chapter, its engines silent, its passengers frozen in time. The ocean still holds its secrets, vast and indifferent. And above that endless horizon the question lingers, how could something so large, so modern, simply disappear? When we speak of mysteries in aviation, none resonate quite like this one. It's not just about a missing plane, it's about the human desire for answers, the ache of uncertainty, and the fragile line between control and chaos in our world. The disappearance of Skyline Airways Flight 208 reminds us that the sky, as familiar as it seems, still holds mysteries beyond comprehension. The story continues to echo in every takeoff, every flight path, every family that watches a plane vanish into the clouds and whispers a quiet prayer for safe arrival. Because somewhere, beyond the reach of radar and reason, lies the truth. A truth that has yet to be found. As days turned into months and months slowly faded into years, the mystery of Skyline Airways Flight 208 refused to rest. For every piece of data that surfaced, another question emerged, weaving a web of uncertainty that stretched across the globe. The aircraft had been a marvel of modern engineering, equipped with redundant systems, satellite communications, and fail-safe mechanisms designed to prevent exactly this kind of vanishing. And yet it was gone. How could a machine built to be traceable in every corner of the world disappear into nothingness? That question haunted experts, pilots, and ordinary people alike. In the absence of answers, people created their own. Some experts believed a rapid decompression could have knocked out communications and incapacitated everyone on board within seconds. They imagined the aircraft drifting silently on autopilot until fuel exhaustion brought it down into the deep ocean. Others argued that such a scenario could not explain the deliberate course change detected in satellite analysis. Someone had turned the aircraft away from its flight path. That detail alone carried heavy implications. Had there been foul play, had the captain, a man admired for his professionalism, somehow decided to end it all? Investigators struggled to reconcile the man they knew with the theories being spun about him. Every fragment of his life was examined, his family, his computer data, his final communications, but nothing conclusively pointed to intent. It was a case built on shadows. Meanwhile, oceanographers worked tirelessly to calculate where wreckage might surface, simulating ocean currents and wind patterns. The sea, however, does not easily surrender its secrets. Waves and tides shifted endlessly, scattering potential evidence across thousands of miles. When small fragments finally reached distant shores, bits of fuselage, a torn seat cover, a piece of wing, they told stories of violent impact, of metal torn apart by immense force. But those pieces were like single words torn from a book. They hinted at tragedy, but not the full narrative. For the families, each discovery was both hope and heartbreak. It meant progress, but also confirmation that their loved ones were never coming home. In candlelight vigils across cities, they held photographs, whispered prayers, and demanded transparency. Governments held press conferences, promising renewed efforts, but funding was finite, and patience even more so. When the official search was suspended after years of effort, silence once again replaced answers. Yet the mystery refused to die. Independent expeditions, funded by private organizations and even individuals, continued to probe the depths. Some spent their savings chasing closure, others joined for the sake of curiosity, and a few because they couldn't bear the thought that somewhere beneath those waves, a story remained unfinished. As the world watched, Skyline 218 became more than a tragedy. It became a mirror reflecting humanity's relationship with uncertainty. People are comforted by control, by logic, by the belief that every question has an answer. But this disappearance defied those beliefs. Even in the digital age, where satellites can read license plates from orbit, a single aircraft had slipped beyond sight. It reminded humanity that despite progress, nature still holds dominion over vast, untamed regions of the planet. The ocean floor, deeper than Everest is tall, remains one of the last frontiers. And somewhere within that darkness, the remains of the flight lay undisturbed. Investigators turned to new methods. Advanced sonar systems mapped underwater ridges with unprecedented accuracy. Artificial intelligence combed through terabytes of ocean floor imagery, teaching computers to differentiate between natural formations and possible wreckage. These technologies were born from grief and necessity, marking a leap forward for future aviation safety. Every line of code, every satellite adjustment, was a silent tribute to those who had vanished. The world was learning through loss. In classrooms and aviation forums, the story of Skyline 208 became a case study. Pilots discussed what could have gone wrong, engineers debated system redundancies, psychologists examined how uncertainty shapes collective trauma. The tragedy was no longer confined to one night. It had become part of global memory. Documentaries, books, and films tried to capture its essence, each offering a theory, each attempting to explain what official reports could not. But none truly satisfied the heart's need for closure. Back at Meridian Airport, where Flight 208 had once departed into the night, a memorial stood quietly beside the runway. It bore the names of every soul on board, etched in metal, facing the sky. Visitors came often, families, aviation enthusiasts, even travelers from other nations, each drawn by the same question: how could this happen? The wind there carried the faint echo of engines that once roared, now long silent. It was a sacred space for reflection, not only on what was lost but also on the fragility of certainty. As time moved on, technology continued to evolve. New aircraft were fitted with real-time satellite tracking systems that transmitted their positions every minute. Regulators mandated that cockpit voice recorders would now have longer battery lives and water-activated beacons capable of sending signals from extreme depths. The global aviation community had learned from pain. No one wanted another Skyline 208. And yet, even as these safeguards were put in place, the haunting realization remained: sometimes, even with the best technology, fate writes its own script. Years later, an autonomous underwater vehicle scanning an unexplored sector of the ocean floor detected an anomaly. An object partially buried in silt, shaped unlike any known geological formation. The world held its breath. Analysts reviewed the sonar image, their voices trembling with both caution and hope. Could this be it? Could the final chapter of Skyline 208 finally be found? A ship was dispatched, its crew working around the clock as storms battered the region. Cameras descended into the abyss, their lights piercing darkness untouched for centuries. And then, slowly, an outline emerged, a fragment of a fuselage, twisted and eroded by time. Letters faintly visible on the metal skin spelled Skyline. For the first time in nearly a decade, the sea whispered an answer. The discovery reignited global attention. News channels replayed the moment endlessly, while families gathered in tearful silence. Investigators confirmed that the wreckage matched the missing aircraft. The black boxes were recovered, though corroded, holding fragments of data, enough to reconstruct the final minutes. The recording revealed nothing sinister, only the eerie calm of routine before everything went silent. A sudden loss of cabin pressure, electrical failure, and disorientation had likely plunged the plane into chaos. Within minutes it was over. No cries, no struggle, just an abrupt end to hundreds of lives swallowed by the dark sea. The truth, though devastating, brought a strange peace. For years, speculation had filled the void, But now the facts, though incomplete, offered something tangible. Families could finally hold memorials knowing where their loved ones had come to rest. Investigators could close their reports, knowing they had pushed technology and perseverance to their limits. Humanity, for all its brilliance, had stared into the depths and found humility. Yet, even after the answers surfaced, the mystery retained its allure. There were still gaps, questions about the sequence of system failures, about why no distress signal was ever transmitted, about how long the passengers might have remained conscious. The ocean, ever patient, refused to yield every detail. Some mysteries, it seemed, were destined to remain half-told, suspended between truth and the unknown. In the years that followed, Flight 218 became a symbol of resilience. It taught the world that behind every aircraft number and tail code lies a universe of human stories, dreams, ambitions, love, and ordinary lives caught in extraordinary circumstances. Pilots flying over the same routes sometimes looked out their windows into the darkness below, imagining the ghostly presence of that lost flight. Some said they felt a strange calm there, as though the souls resting beneath the waves were watching over those still traveling through the sky. Every aviation advancement that came afterward bore its invisible fingerprint. Real, time-tracking networks, improved communication links, automatic emergency reporting, all were born because a plane once disappeared without a trace. Governments began to share air traffic data more openly. International cooperation deepened, transcending borders that had once divided. The world, shaken by mystery, had found unity in prevention. Still, there remains a human truth that transcends technology. Not every question can be answered. Some stories end in silence, and within that silence lies their power. Skyline 218's disappearance reminded humanity that progress cannot erase uncertainty, it can only illuminate it. The sky, vast and infinite, still holds places beyond our reach, and in those places dwell the ghosts of all the journeys that never found their end. On the 10th anniversary of the disappearance, a global broadcast revisited the event. Families spoke of healing, scientists discussed discoveries, and pilots paid tribute. The voice of the narrator, calm and reflective, closed the documentary with words that resonated deeply. Somewhere between the stars above and the waves below, Flight 208 continues its eternal journey, a reminder that the sky, though mapped, is never truly conquered. Those words echoed across living rooms and hearts worldwide. For those who had lost loved ones, they were not just words, they were acknowledgement, validation, and closure. The aircraft might never soar again, but its story had given meaning to the world that remained behind. It had taught that even in the face of loss, humanity's greatest strength lies in its determination to understand, to search, and to remember. And so, the mystery lives on, not as a symbol of despair, but as a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration. Every contrail that streaks across the horizon now carries a silent tribute to those who vanished that night. Each takeoff is an act of faith, each landing a quiet celebration of safety and connection. Flight 208 may have been lost in the sky, but it was never forgotten. Its passengers, its crew, its story, woven forever into the tapestry of human history, remind us that the unknown is not something to fear, but to learn from. Even now, long after the search ships have returned to shore and the news cameras have moved on, the ocean still holds the wreckage. Resting peacefully in the depths, fish drift between the broken wings, coral begins to grow along the fuselage, and time gently reclaims what was once a triumph of engineering. Above, the waves roll endlessly, catching sunlight that dances like fleeting memories. Somewhere far above, another plane crosses the same sky, its passengers unaware of the ghosts that travel with them. The ghosts of questions, of lessons, of lives once lived. And in that endless balance between sky and sea, between the known and the unknowable, the story of Skyline Airways Flight 218 continues to speak, to remind, to warn, and to inspire. It began as a mystery, but it became something far greater, a story about the limits of certainty, the reach of human perseverance, and the fragile beauty of every journey that dares to take flight into the unknown. In the vast darkness of the night sky, far above the restless waves of the ocean, a single aircraft moved steadily toward its destination. Skyline Airways Flight 208 was halfway through its journey, its engines humming a steady rhythm, its lights flickering like a distant constellation. Inside, everything seemed peaceful. The cabin was dim, passengers asleep, flight attendants quietly performing their rounds. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer sat side by side, focused yet relaxed, their instruments glowing softly in the dark. Nothing about that moment suggested history was about to take a turn into mystery. The radio crackled with static. It was a routine check from air traffic control, verifying the flight's position as it approached a new sector of airspace. The captain responded in his calm, precise voice, confirming altitude, heading, and flight level. His tone was professional, almost serene. To the controllers, it was another exchange in a night full of flights passing across invisible corridors of the sky. Skyline 208, maintain flight level 350, contact Oceanic Control on frequency 132.1 came the instruction. The captain replied with the last known words ever heard from the flight, Roger that 132.1, good night. Those words seemed ordinary, the kind every pilot says dozens of times each day. Yet, hours later, they would become infamous. They were the final echo before silence, the last human trace before an aircraft vanished from every radar screen and every communication channel on Earth. After that short, calm acknowledgement, there would be no distress call, no mayday, no sign of trouble, just an abrupt disappearance into a realm of uncertainty that would haunt the world for years to come. At the time, nothing seemed unusual. Controllers assumed the aircraft had switched frequencies as instructed. But when minutes passed with no contact established on the next frequency, a small red flag appeared on a radar display. One controller tried to hail the flight, repeating the call sign, Skyline 208, this is Oceanic Control, do you copy? Silence. Skyline 208, radio check, silence. The radar blip flickered once, then disappeared entirely. Within moments, the controllers realized something was wrong. They contacted neighboring stations, hoping the plane had checked in elsewhere. It hadn't. The aircraft had vanished. The last known communication was analyzed over and over again in the weeks that followed. Experts studied the tone of the captain's voice, every syllable, every pause, searching for hidden signs of distress or mechanical failure. Voice analysts compared the recording to earlier transmissions, looking for changes in breathing or inflection that might suggest stress or confusion. There were none. His voice had been calm, deliberate, and professional, the voice of a man completely in control. That calmness made the mystery even deeper. How could everything sound so normal, then end so suddenly? In the cockpit, according to standard flight data, both pilots had been monitoring systems as the plane left mainland radar coverage. This was a crucial moment in any oceanic crossing, a transition zone where aircraft rely on satellite communication instead of ground radar. It was a routine handover, something they had done many times before, but after that moment, all digital signals stopped. The aircraft's transponder, the device that broadcasts its position to controllers, ceased transmitting. Primary radar no longer showed a return. The sky above the ocean became empty. Back on the ground, air traffic centers began coordinating. They assumed at first it was a temporary technical failure. Planes sometimes lose contact when switching frequencies or due to atmospheric interference. But after 10, then 20 minutes, concern grew. The controllers reached out to nearby aircraft, asking them to attempt radio contact. Pilots of other flights transmitted emergency relays, calling into the darkness, Skyline 218, this is Starjet 112, do you copy? They repeated the message several times. The airwaves remained eerily silent. That silence, experts would later say, was one of the most chilling aspects of the disappearance. Because in aviation, silence means uncertainty, and uncertainty can mean danger. Investigators replayed the last radio exchange repeatedly in the years that followed. The clarity of the captain's final words haunted them. It wasn't what he said that mattered, but what came after. There was no warning, no sound of panic, no indication of malfunction, just a perfect conversation followed by nothing. As hours passed, emergency protocols were activated. When an aircraft misses multiple check-ins, an uncertainty phase is declared, followed by an alert phase, and finally a distress phase. For Skyline 218, all three happened within hours. Rescue centers began calculating possible descent points based on fuel endurance and last known altitude. But there was no signal from the aircraft's emergency locator beacon, no distress transmission from its systems, no ping from its black box. The plane had vanished into silence so complete that it defied logic. Meanwhile, the families of passengers remained unaware. They tracked the flight's progress online, watching it inch closer to its destination. But suddenly, the progress bar froze. The flight was marked as delayed. Some thought it was a software glitch, others grew uneasy. Hours later, when officials announced that the aircraft was missing, confusion turned to fear. The last known communication was played on television across the world. Those simple words, "Roger that, good night," they became the haunting line that symbolized the world's most perplexing aviation mystery. In the early stages of the investigation, every possibility was on the table. Was it a sudden electrical failure, a rapid decompression, a hijacking, or something far stranger? The absence of distress calls was puzzling. In most emergencies, pilots have at least a few seconds to transmit a mayday. Even in catastrophic failures, a brief word or coded signal often escapes. But here, nothing. Experts concluded that whatever happened must have been instantaneous or disabling enough to prevent any form of communication. But then, how could the aircraft continue flying for hours afterward, as satellite data later suggested? It was a contradiction that refused to resolve. Some experts speculated that the plane's communication systems were intentionally shut down. Others argued for cascading technical malfunctions that crippled the transponder and radio simultaneously. Both explanations were possible, yet neither fully convincing. The final radio call was too normal for a crew in distress, too composed for an unfolding catastrophe. It was the kind of transmission that said everything was fine, and that, perhaps, was the most disturbing part. The recording was examined by multiple international agencies. Sound engineers filtered background noise, amplifying faint frequencies to detect hidden anomalies. They even analyzed ambient cockpit sounds, hoping to hear mechanical cues that might reveal something. A faint alarm, a change in engine pitch, a sudden spike in background vibration. None were found. The cockpit, in that final moment, had been as calm as a late night flight over open water should be. But calmness can be deceptive. Beneath the surface of normality, something might already have been unfolding, something slow, insidious, and unnoticed. Some investigators theorized that a gradual depressurization could have crept in, reducing oxygen levels in the cabin and cockpit without triggering immediate alarms. In such a scenario, the pilots might have felt nothing more than mild drowsiness before losing consciousness. The plane, still on autopilot, could have continued flying silently into oblivion until its fuel ran dry. It was a chillingly plausible explanation, but without the black box, it remained speculation. Others rejected that theory, pointing to radar data showing deliberate course changes. The aircraft had turned back toward the continent shortly after its last transmission. Someone had to be conscious to make that maneuver. The question then became, who was flying and why? The lack of communication during those crucial moments became even more mysterious. If there was a deliberate act, why maintain radio silence? And if it was mechanical failure, how did the plane manage controlled turns without human input? Every answer raised new contradictions. The last known communication, though brief, became a focal point for psychological profiling. Experts studied the captain's past radio calls, noting his habit of ending transmissions courteously. In his final words, there was nothing unusual, no pause, no hesitation. The cadence was smooth, confident routine. To many, that suggested normalcy until the very last second. To others, it hinted at professionalism under stress, perhaps concealing awareness of trouble. he didn't wish to broadcast. Without knowing what happened next, interpretation became a guessing game. Meanwhile, aviation historians compared the event to earlier disappearances, aircraft lost over oceans decades ago, long before GPS and satellite tracking. They noted that technology had changed, but nature hadn't. The ocean was still vast, the sky still unpredictable. In many ways, the mystery of Flight 208 was a modern echo of ancient fears. The idea that some parts of the world remain untamed, capable of swallowing even our greatest machines. The final radio message was like a voice vanishing into that abyss, the last human sound before the unknown took over. Years later, when the wreckage was finally found, investigators returned once again to that final moment of communication. The black box revealed fragments of cockpit sounds, confirming that the flight had been normal up to that point. A sudden electrical failure, likely caused by a cascading short circuit, had disabled communications seconds after the last message. The pilots, confronted by rapidly failing instruments, likely focused on regaining control rather than transmitting distress. Within minutes, the situation had escalated beyond recovery. The calm "good night" was unknowingly their farewell to the world. In the end, those few words became immortalized, a testament to professionalism, tragedy, and mystery. They symbolized the fragile line between routine and disaster, between control and chaos. For aviation safety, they became a lesson to improve redundancy, to ensure that communication can never vanish completely again. But for the families and the world, those words remained something else, a haunting echo of voices carried away into the endless night sky, forever suspended between knowledge and the unknown. When investigators pieced together the final timeline, they found that the last known transmission wasn't just the end of a radio call. It was the beginning of a mystery that would stretch across years, oceans, and imaginations. After those calm words faded into static, the aircraft kept moving forward into the night, its engines slicing through the thin air above an unbroken sea. It was as if the world itself had chosen to mute its presence, letting it slip quietly into silence. For the families waiting below, the clock had stopped, yet for the aircraft, time still moved for a while longer. The radar screens that had once displayed a bright green dot now showed only emptiness. It was a void that would come to define not just a missing airplane, but the emotional geography of hundreds of lives that had been connected to it. In the hours that followed, confusion turned to dread. Airline operations centers called every communication relay they could find. Pilots were asked to scan radio frequencies and report anything unusual. Search satellites began sweeping the area, but the dark expanse of ocean offered no reflection, no clue. The crew of a nearby cargo flight reported seeing nothing unusual on the route. The weather was calm, visibility fair, no storms, no lightning, nothing that could explain such sudden silence. It was as if Flight 208 had simply stepped into another dimension, one beyond radar, radio, and reason. As dawn broke across the horizon, the search began in earnest. Coast Guard and naval ships were dispatched to the estimated last known coordinates, but they found only water as smooth as glass. No debris, no oil slicks, no life rafts. Helicopters flew grid patterns for hours, their spotlights cutting through the mist, searching for the slightest trace of wreckage. Onboard sensors detected nothing. Even the ocean seemed reluctant to reveal its secrets. News outlets around the world began breaking the story by midday. Passenger jet missing over the ocean. The headlines read. The words echoed eerily similar to tragedies of the past. Reporters replayed the last radio call again and again on television, that calm, collected "good night," analyzing its tone as if decoding a final message from the edge of existence. Viewers watched, transfixed by the sound of a pilot's voice that had once been routine, but now felt like a ghostly whisper from another realm. The world wanted answers, but none came. Families gathered in airports, clinging to hope, staring at arrival boards that refused to change from delayed. Airline representatives spoke in measured tones, asking for patience, promising updates. But as hours stretched into days, hope began to fracture. Grief counselors were brought in. Small rooms filled with people waiting for news became places of quiet heartbreak. Each family member clung to the same question: how could an aircraft simply vanish in the modern world, with satellites, radars, and global surveillance? Investigators from multiple countries joined forces. They began by reconstructing the flight path using all available data: radar returns, satellite pings, fuel calculations, and ocean current models. Every clue mattered. The last communication was the timestamp from which they measured everything. It was like the first missing piece of a puzzle that would either explain everything or nothing at all. Engineers recreated the flight systems on simulators, repeating the exact route and altitude, trying to replicate the silence. Nothing produced the same result. Even when multiple failures were programmed, at least one emergency signal was always transmitted. The disappearance of Flight 288 defied every technical explanation. Deep in a control room, sound engineers continued analyzing the final transmission. Using advanced software, they separated layers of frequency to identify hidden background elements. There was faint engine hum, steady and smooth, indicating both engines were running normally. There were no alarms, no warning chimes, no shouts. The cockpit was calm. Then, milliseconds before the radio ended, there was a faint, almost imperceptible click. Possibly the sound of a switch being toggled. It could have been the transfer to the new frequency, or something else. No one could be sure. But that tiny sound became the centerpiece of debate. Was it normal? Or was it the first sign that something unexpected was happening? Psychologists were brought in to profile the crew. Both pilots had spotless records. The captain, a 20-year veteran, was known for precision and calm judgment. The first officer was young, ambitious, and deeply respected for his discipline. There were no signs of stress, no evidence of sabotage or mental strain. Their final communication was consistent with everything known about their professionalism. That's what made it so unsettling. They sounded exactly as they always did. Days later, a small piece of debris washed ashore on an isolated island thousands of kilometers from the last known position. It was part of a wing panel, later confirmed to belong to Flight 218. The discovery reignited hope and horror simultaneously. Hope, because it meant they were searching in the right ocean. Horror, because it meant the aircraft had indeed gone down somewhere in the vast deep. The final communication, once a routine sign-off, was now officially the last human evidence of the flight's existence. Everything that followed had to be inferred from oceanic drift and faint satellite data. Underwater search vessels were deployed, scanning the depths with sonar. The ocean floor was mapped, revealing canyons, ridges, and trenches as alien as another planet. Hours of sonar imaging produced nothing but static noise. Each false signal raised hearts and crushed them again. The world watched the operation unfold on live television, the hum of machines, the ping of sonar, the hope that somewhere beneath that endless water lay the answer. But days turned to weeks, and still, the ocean remained silent. In those long months of searching, the last known communication became a kind of relic, the only tangible piece of the crew's presence. It was replayed not just by experts, but by loved ones who wanted to hear their voices one more time. Some said they could sense emotion hidden in the tone, others said it was purely routine. But everyone agreed on one thing: those words connected the living and the lost in a way no wreckage ever could. It was a reminder that in the face of technology and progress, human fragility still ruled the skies. When wreckage was finally discovered 2 years later by an autonomous underwater vehicle, it was nearly intact. The fuselage had broken into 2 large sections, resting deep within a trench. Investigators retrieved the flight recorders, long silent but remarkably preserved. The moment those black boxes were opened, the world held its breath. The data would reveal the truth that the final radio call could not. The recordings told a story of seconds and decisions. They confirmed that minutes after the last transmission, the cockpit lights flickered, followed by a sudden burst of alerts. Electrical system failures, hydraulic pressure drops, and autopilot disconnection. The pilots worked furiously to regain control, switching to manual systems as the aircraft pitched slightly downward. There were no cries, no chaos, only focused determination. They tried to restart the power buses, but each attempt overloaded the system further. The altitude began to drop. They fought gravity in darkness, unaware that no one could hear them anymore. What struck investigators most was the composure of the crew. Even as alarms filled the cockpit, their voices remained steady, analytical, calm. "We've lost comms," one of them said quietly. "Keep her steady," replied the captain. They believed it was a recoverable malfunction, not realizing the situation was cascading beyond control. The aircraft's secondary systems began shutting down, one after another. Then came the sound of rapid decompression. A loud roar, followed by silence. The recording ended abruptly. For the world, the mystery had finally found an explanation, yet it felt incomplete. The cause, a chain of electrical and structural failures triggered by a microscopic crack in a power relay, seemed too small to justify such vast loss. But in aviation, as in life, it is often the smallest unseen fracture that determines destiny. The calm farewell, "good night," became not just the end of a conversation, but the last moment before fate revealed its hand. Documentaries later captured this story in haunting tones. The voice of the narrator blending with soft music, describing how one calm message became the most analyzed transmission in modern aviation. It was not just about technology or systems, it was about humanity, about trust in machines, the illusion of control, and the fragility of communication that binds one sky to the next. Experts emphasize that no matter how advanced systems become, the human element remains irreplaceable. That last call, simple and polite, reflected the courage of professionals who stayed composed in the face of the unknown. Even today, that transmission is played in aviation schools as a case study in calm under pressure. It reminds pilots that routine is both a strength and a danger. Because when everything feels normal, disaster may already be unfolding silently behind the instruments. It reminds controllers that each word exchanged with a cockpit carries the weight of trust. And it reminds the public that every flight, no matter how ordinary, is a symphony of human precision and fragile machinery dancing with nature's unpredictability. As the wreckage was raised from the ocean floor, investigators placed the recovered cockpit voice recorder in a clear case at the Memorial Center, built near the coast. Above it, engraved in steel, were the captain's final words, "Roger that 132.1, good night." Visitors stand before it in silence, hearing in their minds the calm voice that once crossed the airwaves, not knowing it was saying farewell. For many, it symbolizes not tragedy, but dignity, a reminder that even in the final moments, professionalism and grace can endure. Years have passed, but the story of Skyline Airways 218 remains one of the most studied events in aviation history. Each time a pilot signs off with a routine, "good night." Somewhere in the collective memory of aviation, those words echo back, a quiet acknowledgement of the thin line between certainty and mystery. The sky may be vast, the technology precise, but the human voice remains its most fragile connection. And so, every night, as aircraft glide across oceans and continents, somewhere a controller hears those same words, and for a fleeting moment, remembers the flight that never replied. In the end, that is what remains, a handful of words suspended in time, a mystery finally understood but never forgotten, a story where the last sound was not of panic, but of peace. The legacy of Flight 218 lives not just in investigation reports or recovered wreckage, but in the shared silence that followed its final transmission, a silence that taught the world how precious every voice truly is in the endless night sky. When the world first heard the words, "The aircraft is missing," disbelief spread faster than the breaking news alert. In an era where every phone was connected to satellites and every ship was tracked by GPS, the idea that a massive jetliner could vanish seemed impossible. But reality has its own way of humbling technology. Skyline Airways Flight 218 had faded from radar and left no signal, no debris, and no trace of the 239 souls on board. Within hours, What began as confusion turned into the largest coordinated search operation the modern world had ever seen. In the first days, the search area was small, just a few hundred square miles around the flight's last known coordinates. Helicopters, naval vessels, and reconnaissance aircraft were deployed from neighboring countries. Every available resource was mobilized, every vessel ordered to keep watch for floating wreckage or oil slicks. Teams worked around the clock, scanning with binoculars and radar equipment. But as night fell, the ocean turned into an endless abyss, swallowing light and hope alike. It was the first sign of how difficult this mission would become. Satellite agencies around the globe began combing through their data. Governments that had never cooperated before opened their surveillance archives. Infrared sensors, maritime patrols, and satellite pings were analyzed to reconstruct the path of the missing jet. Each clue was like a faint heartbeat in a sea of silence. Hours turned into days, and the search grid expanded exponentially. What began as a circle soon became a continent-sized zone, an area so vast that even the most advanced technology struggled to cover it. On the surface, ships scanned the waves, launching small drones and sonar buoys to detect any unusual object. Beneath them, submarines equipped with deep sea microphones listened for the telltale ping of the black box, a sound so faint that it could vanish beneath a single crashing wave. Engineers calculated battery lifespans, knowing that every passing hour reduced their chances. The black boxes could emit for about 30 days. Beyond that, the ocean would fall silent forever. The human cost of the search was immense. Thousands of people, sailors, pilots, scientists, volunteers, worked tirelessly, often in harsh weather and without rest. Many described the mission as chasing a shadow across a moving horizon. Ocean currents shifted daily, scattering any potential debris across thousands of kilometers. What was detected one day disappeared the next. The currents carried fragments in unpredictable directions, mocking even the most advanced drift models. Each morning began with briefings. Maps spread across tables, red lines tracing yesterday's paths, blue lines marking today's new zones. Experts debated satellite data, arguing over whether a faint signal meant hope or noise. Every theory had its believers and skeptics. One satellite company claimed to have detected faint handshakes between the aircraft and orbiting systems long after radar contact was lost. That revelation changed everything. It meant the plane could have flown for hours beyond its last known position, possibly turning, diverting, or even crossing entire ocean regions unseen. With that discovery, the search grid expanded again, this time into the most remote parts of the Southern Ocean. What had once been a 400-square-mile area now spanned over 1.2 million square miles, an area larger than the entire Indian subcontinent. Ships sailed from distant ports, carrying sonar arrays, deep sea vehicles, and hoped that the depths would finally yield a clue. The media called it the search of the century. But even as technology advanced, the ocean remained patient, guarding its secret with cruel precision. The search faced logistical nightmares. The nearest land bases were thousands of kilometers away. Crews battled 30-foot waves, freezing temperatures, and violent storms that battered ships for days. Equipment malfunctioned under the pressure of the abyss. The sea itself posed new challenges. Rugged, uneven, with ridges and trenches deeper than Mount Everest is tall. The black box pings could bounce unpredictably, creating ghost signals that led teams in circles. Every false detection drained resources, morale, and time. Back on land, command centers buzzed day and night. Giant digital screens displayed satellite feeds, ocean maps, and data models. Experts from multiple countries worked side by side, representing agencies that had never collaborated before. It was a rare moment of global unity. Nations setting aside politics to chase one shared goal, finding the truth. But even unity could not conquer the sea. The task was monumental, almost biblical in scale. For every mile of ocean searched, there were hundreds left untouched. Meanwhile, families of the passengers followed every press briefing, clinging to any sign of progress. Their grief turned into activism, demanding transparency and accountability. They questioned search delays, data interpretation, and government motives. The public grew impatient, the media grew relentless. In a world driven by instant answers, this mystery defied them all. The ocean became a mirror reflecting human limitation. No matter how advanced the tools, nature's vastness remained unchallenged. Months passed, and the first phase of the search came to an end. Nothing significant was found. No wreckage, no oil trails, no signals. The operation's cost had reached billions of dollars. Yet, even in failure, scientists learned more about the deep ocean than ever before. Entire sections of the seabed were mapped for the first time, revealing underwater mountains and trenches unknown to geography. The tragedy, in its own way, expanded human knowledge of Earth's final frontier. Still, public interest began to wane. Funding became harder to secure. The story that once dominated headlines slowly faded from the front pages. But for the families, it was not over. They continued to write letters, hold vigils, and plead for the search to continue. For them, every sunrise without closure was another wound. The governments eventually agreed to a second phase, deploying even more sophisticated equipment, autonomous underwater vehicles, sonar drones capable of mapping terrain in extreme depths, and AI-driven analysis software that could interpret sonar images with higher precision. This second phase marked a turning point. The technology used had been designed for exploring other planets, adapted now for Earth's own hidden spaces. These robotic explorers glided silently through the darkness, their lights cutting across the blackness of the deep. Cameras captured haunting images of the ocean floor, strange corals, shipwrecks from centuries past, even volcanic vents. But nothing resembling the missing aircraft. Each mission brought breathtaking images of life unknown, but not the one thing everyone was searching for. At one point, a sonar image captured what seemed like a large object, partially buried under sediment. Excitement surged through the command center. Experts analyzed it frame by frame. The size and shape were nearly consistent with a jet fuselage. Ships were redirected, remotely operated vehicles deployed. When the cameras descended to that depth, the object was revealed, an ancient geological formation that mimicked the shape of a plane. Hope gave way to exhaustion once again. The physical challenges were only part of the struggle. The emotional toll on search teams was immense. They lived months at sea, away from families, haunted by the weight of their mission. Many described feeling connected to the missing passengers, strangers whose fate had become their purpose. Each failed attempt felt like a personal loss. The ocean was vast, but their responsibility felt even larger. They were not just searching for wreckage, they were searching for peace, for closure, for truth, for the dignity of those who vanished. Eventually, after nearly 2 years, part of the wreckage was discovered by chance, not by the main search team. A fisherman on a remote island noticed a piece of metal washed ashore, curved, corroded, but unmistakably part of an aircraft. When investigators confirmed it belonged to Skyline Airways Flight 208, the shock reverberated across the world. How could a fragment travel thousands of kilometers from the estimated crash zone? Oceanographers explained that currents could carry debris across hemispheres. But this discovery also meant that the initial calculations were wrong. The plane might have gone down far outside the search grid. That realization forced a complete reevaluation of the search model. Engineers and oceanographers spent months developing new drift simulations, combining wind, temperature, and current patterns. Advanced AI analyzed millions of possibilities to predict new potential crash zones. It was science on the edge of uncertainty, chasing faint signals across a restless sea. And yet, despite these efforts, most of the wreckage remained missing. The search for Skyline 208 became more than an investigation. It became a symbol of persistence, unity, and the limits of human control. It reminded the world that even with all our satellites, algorithms, and machines, there are places on Earth that remain beyond our reach. The sea, silent and endless, still guards its mysteries with an unyielding patience. Every time a wave breaks on the surface, It whispers the same truth that not everything lost can be found, but everything searched for leaves a mark on the world. Months after the discovery of that single piece of wreckage, the world realized that the mystery of Skyline Airways Flight 208 would not be solved quickly. The ocean, vast and indifferent, had scattered the aircraft's remains like whispers across thousands of miles. For the families, every sunrise without news felt heavier, yet the searchers refused to stop. New vessels were commissioned, new contracts signed, and new maps drawn. Humanity was not ready to surrender to the silence. The new phase of the operation began with hope and skepticism in equal measure. This time, private companies joined the effort, bringing technologies never before used in civilian searches. Autonomous drones capable of diving 6 kilometers below the surface roamed the ocean floor. They mapped terrain with lasers and sonar, sending back images in near real time. The data poured in, overwhelming analysts who worked in shifts to decode every contour, every shadow that might conceal wreckage. For a brief period, the mission became a rare collaboration between governments, scientists, corporations, and grieving citizens. The challenges were extraordinary. Weather could undo weeks of progress. Ocean storms battered ships, forcing evacuations and damaging equipment. A single mechanical fault could halt a 50 million operation for days. Salt water corroded electronics. Currents dragged sensors off course. The drone's batteries, limited by physics, forced them to resurface constantly, where waves the size of buildings crashed upon their fragile frames. Engineers slept in their chairs, monitoring screens that flickered with blue patterns representing the unknown. Each successful scan brought pride, each blank return, despair, and yet amid the exhaustion there was beauty. The cameras captured alien landscapes, coral forests glowing like galaxies, trenches lit by the faint light of robotic eyes, creatures no human had ever seen. For the scientists aboard, it was a reminder that even tragedy could expand understanding. They mapped over 700,000 square kilometers of previously unexplored seabed, a hidden world that had existed for millions of years, waiting for a lost aircraft to lead humanity to it. Still, the focus remained the same, to find answers for the 239 people who had vanished. In the command center, data scientists built complex simulations using artificial intelligence trained on ocean behavior. They fed in wind speed, current flow, water temperature, and satellite pings to reconstruct the aircraft's likely final moments. Each new calculation shifted the possible crash site hundreds of kilometers, painting a portrait of uncertainty that grew larger instead of smaller. It was like chasing a moving ghost. As the months dragged on, cracks began to appear, not in the ocean floor, but in human resolve. Nations debated funding, politicians questioned whether the cost could still be justified. The operation had already consumed billions of dollars, and some governments wanted to declare it a closed case. But the families refused to let go. They organized petitions, protested outside ministries, and held vigils where candles formed the shape of an airplane under the night sky. For them, it was not about money, it was about truth. Their courage kept the mission alive when logic would have abandoned it. Investigators also faced another kind of storm: conspiracy and speculation. Online forums filled with theories that ranged from mechanical failure to hijacking, even supernatural causes. The mystery of Flight 208 had captured the world's imagination, and in the vacuum of certainty, imagination became fuel for rumors. This flood of misinformation frustrated the experts who had dedicated years of their lives to real science. They watched as the narrative of their work was distorted by voices that had never seen a sonar map or felt the roar of the sea. Yet they continued, driven by duty and compassion. Technological innovation became the only constant. Engineers developed a new kind of sonar called synthetic aperture mapping, which allowed clearer imaging at greater depths. Each deployment produced terabytes of data, lines of coded whispers from the deep. Computer clusters processed it, sometimes identifying shapes that could be fragments of fuselage or engines. Most turned out to be rocks, volcanic deposits, or wrecks from ancient ships, but occasionally, Something metallic shimmered faintly on screen, and hope surged again. Every anomaly was followed, photographed, and catalogued, even when it led nowhere. The deeper the search went, the more dangerous it became. Pressure at those depths could crush steel. Communication lagged by seconds, meaning operators had to pilot machines by instinct and training rather than real-time control. At one point, a drone lost contact completely. For 20 hours it drifted, presumed destroyed. Then, against all odds, it resurfaced, battered but intact, carrying with it hours of data that revealed images of a vast underwater ridge scattered with debris. Scientists rushed to analyze it. The pattern of fragments seemed almost deliberate, a trail that could lead to the main wreck. That discovery reignited the mission with new fire. Ships converged on the coordinates, launching multiple deep, diving vehicles. Days passed, then weeks, as they mapped the area piece by piece. The ocean, as if taunting them, played its cruelest trick yet. The debris field ended abruptly, as if erased. Investigators theorized that the main wreckage had slipped down a steep trench, beyond the reach of their current machines. To go deeper would mean designing new technology altogether, capable of surviving depths never before explored. The challenge shifted from finding the plane to inventing the means to do so. In laboratories across continents, engineers began building what would become the most advanced autonomous underwater vehicle ever created. They called it Poseidon, named after the god of the sea. Sleek and silent, powered by AI navigation, it could dive deeper and travel farther than anything before it. When Poseidon was finally deployed, scientists and families alike watched the live feed in reverent silence. Hours passed as it descended into darkness, its sensors glowing like stars. Then, on the third day, the first unmistakable images appeared: pieces of fuselage, engines, fragments of wings half buried in silt. It had found the final resting place of Skyline Airways Flight 208. The announcement broke across the world like thunder. Television anchors choked on their words, newspapers printed the images in black and blue. For the first time in years there was proof. The aircraft that had haunted humanity's conscience had finally been located. Governments released statements of relief and sorrow. At the sight, a moment of silence was observed aboard every vessel. Searchers stood on deck, watching the sun dip below the horizon, realizing that their impossible mission had reached its end. Yet, discovery was not closure. Retrieving the wreckage posed another Herculean challenge. The depth exceeded 6,000 meters, where pressure could collapse titanium. Specialized cables and hydraulic systems had to be designed, and even then, each recovery operation risked losing the fragile remains forever. Over the next several months, pieces of the aircraft were carefully lifted to the surface. Landing gear, wing fragments, personal items. Each artifact was catalogued, cleaned, and sent for analysis. Forensic experts treated them with the tenderness of archaeologists uncovering history. Every object carried a story, a piece of a journey that had ended too soon. When the flight recorders were finally recovered, the world once again held its breath. They had endured crushing pressure for years, but engineers managed to extract partial data. The recordings provided valuable insights but left room for mystery. They revealed that a catastrophic electrical failure had likely crippled the plane's systems, leaving it invisible to radar and unable to communicate. It had flown on autopilot until fuel exhaustion, gliding silently into the ocean. It was a conclusion that confirmed some theories and silenced others, but for many it still wasn't enough. They wanted more than technical truth. They wanted human understanding. In the months following the discovery, documentaries and films revisited the global search, portraying it not as a failure but as one of humanity's greatest collective efforts. It united nations that rarely spoke, combined science and compassion, and turned strangers into teammates bound by a single mission. The crews who had scoured the seas were honored for their endurance. The technology developed during the operation went on to aid marine research, disaster recovery, and even space exploration. Out of tragedy, progress was born. But there was another legacy too. One written not in data or hardware, but in emotion. The search had shown the limits of human control, yet also the depth of human empathy. It taught the world that behind every headline statistic are people who refuse to give up. The engineers who built machines to touch the unreachable. The sailors who braved violent seas to find a truth they might never see. The families who faced government's silence and despair, yet never surrendered hope. Years later, when memorials were built in coastal cities, the names of the passengers and crew were etched into glass walls facing the sea. Visitors could walk among them, reading the names as waves crashed against the shore. In the center stood a sculpture, a broken compass pointing toward the horizon, symbolizing the eternal search for answers. On quiet evenings, family members still came, leaving flowers, letters, or simply standing in silence. They knew the ocean held their loved ones, but the world now knew their story. For the investigators who had dedicated years of their lives to this pursuit, the ending was bittersweet. They had succeeded in solving one of aviation's greatest mysteries, but success came with the haunting realization that so much had been lost. The experience changed them forever. Many continued to work in aviation safety, ensuring that no aircraft would ever disappear so completely again. Global protocols were rewritten, requiring continuous satellite tracking of every commercial flight. The phrase, "plane vanished without a trace," became obsolete, a relic of a painful past. Even now, when pilots cross that part of the ocean, they sometimes mark the coordinates in their flight plans and pause for a moment. In the cockpit, where light from the instruments glows softly against the dark sky, one might imagine the voices of those who came before, calm, professional, and human. Fading into the static, the search for Skyline Airways Flight 218 became more than an investigation. It became a story of perseverance, unity, and the relentless human need to know what lies beyond the horizon. And so, the mission that began with panic ended with purpose. The sea did not give up its secret easily, but in doing so, it reminded the world that discovery is never just about finding something lost. It is about proving that no distance, no darkness, and no depth can silence the human will to seek the truth. The echoes of that search still drift across the waves, carried by the wind, whispered by the tides, a promise that even when the sky swallows what we love, the world will keep searching until it brings them home. When Skyline Airways Flight 208 vanished, it did not just disappear from radar. It vanished from the lives of hundreds of families in an instant. Homes once filled with laughter turned silent, dinner tables remained half-set, and phones kept ringing long after hope had faded. The sound of unanswered calls became the soundtrack of loss. For mothers and fathers, for children who still believed their parents would walk through the door, every hour of uncertainty was a wound that refused to heal. Grief without proof became the most unbearable kind. No body to bury, no farewell to speak, just a question that echoed endlessly, "Where are they?" In the early days, many refused to accept the truth. Families crowded airports, clutching photographs, pleading for answers from airline officials who themselves had none. The waiting lounges turned into sanctuaries of desperation. Television screens displayed breaking news every minute, and faces stared at them in disbelief, each hoping to hear something different, something that would bring their loved ones home. The world moved on to other headlines, but for those left behind, time froze on that single day. As weeks turned to months, grief transformed into something more complex, a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and longing. Support groups began to form. Strangers united by tragedy became each other's family. They met in small halls, lighting candles and sharing stories, trying to find comfort in a pain too large for words. Some turned to faith, others to activism, demanding accountability, transparency, and renewed searches. Their persistence was both inspiring and heartbreaking. They fought not just for truth, but to keep memory alive in a world that had already started to forget. Investigators, too, carried invisible scars. For them, the mission was not only technical, but deeply personal. Many had children of their own, and as they examined wreckage and listened to cockpit recordings, They felt the weight of every life lost. The work demanded composure, yet behind closed doors there were tears and sleepless nights. They lived surrounded by data, maps, sonar images, voice logs. But beneath it all lay an ocean of emotion. They knew that behind each number in their reports was a heartbeat that once existed. The longer the search went on, the heavier the burden grew. Some investigators developed a sense of guilt, convinced they should have done more, gone deeper, searched longer. Others began to withdraw from their families, unable to explain the darkness they carried. Every failed expedition felt like a personal betrayal to those waiting on shore. The sea seemed to mock their efforts, swallowing their hope with every wave. Yet, despite exhaustion, they returned again and again, because giving up meant accepting that hundreds of souls would remain lost forever. And that was something they could never allow. Media attention brought both comfort and pain. Documentaries and interviews kept the story alive, but also forced families to relive their trauma. Every anniversary reopened wounds that never closed. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries became reminders of absence. Parents aged prematurely, faces lined by sorrow and sleepless nights. Children grew up learning their family's story through newspaper clippings rather than memories. Spouses lived with the cruel duality of being called widows and widowers without ever seeing proof of death. It was a grief suspended in time, a heartbreak without conclusion. For the investigators who eventually found the wreck, closure was not triumph but relief mixed with sorrow. When the images of the fuselage appeared on their screens, there was no cheer, no celebration, only silence. The silence of realization that their years of work had led them to a graveyard at the bottom of the sea. The discovery confirmed the loss, but also ended the cruel waiting. They had brought answers to the surface, but it cost them their peace. Many of them left aviation research afterward, saying they could not bear to search again, because each sonar pulse reminded them of what it means to lose faith in the sky. Even after the official reports were released, families continued to struggle. Some found comfort in truth, others rejected it, believing their loved ones might still be alive somewhere, somehow. The human mind, desperate for hope, creates its own reality when faced with the unbearable. Psychologists who worked with the families described the phenomenon as ambiguous loss, mourning without closure. It left scars that therapy could not erase. Many families still keep rooms untouched, clothes hanging, toothbrushes still in place, symbols of love refusing to fade. Years later, memorials were built, yet even those monuments felt incomplete. How can stone capture the weight of love, the depth of longing, or the sound of laughter stolen by fate? And yet, when visitors stand before those walls of names, something profound happens. Silence becomes communion. The ocean breeze carries whispers of peace, and for a brief moment, families and investigators alike feel connected to those they lost. They realize that grief is not a weakness, but proof of love's endurance, and that remembrance is the only way to conquer disappearance. The tragedy of Skyline Airways Flight 208 changed more than aviation, it changed people. It taught the world that behind every mystery are hearts that beat, dreams that were never fulfilled, and lives intertwined by destiny. It revealed the resilience of families who refused to surrender and the humanity of those who search for answers in the darkest corners of the earth. Their suffering reshaped safety laws, improved global cooperation, and awakened compassion in millions who never knew the passengers but still felt their loss. In the end, what remains is not just sadness but legacy, a legacy written in courage, faith, and remembrance. The emotional toll was immeasurable, but so was the strength that emerged from it. These families became voices for the voiceless, and those investigators became witnesses to both tragedy and triumph. Together, they prove that even when the sky takes everything, the human spirit can rise again, not from answers found, but from the love that never stopped searching. When the mystery of Skyline Airways Flight 208 finally began to settle into history, it became clear that its disappearance had done more than shake faith in technology. It had changed the way the world looked at the sky. What began as a tragedy had turned into a movement, a catalyst for change, and a mirror reflecting both the fragility and resilience of human life. Governments, airlines, engineers, and ordinary citizens were forced to confront one of the most uncomfortable truths of modern civilization, that even in an age of satellites and supercomputers, the world could still lose something as large as an airplane and never be certain why. The legacy of Flight 218 began with that realization. It pushed nations to unite where they had once competed, forcing them to share data and coordinate in ways previously unimaginable. Aviation authorities developed global systems that made it impossible for a commercial jet to vanish from radar again. Continuous satellite tracking, real-time black box streaming, and improved transponders were no longer luxuries. They became necessities. What was once a distant goal became urgent law. The industry transformed its fear into innovation. Each improvement carried the silent tribute of those who had been lost. The ocean floor that had swallowed the wreck also gave birth to new frontiers of science. The search for the missing aircraft led to advances in deep sea mapping, robotics, and underwater communication. Technologies that had once existed only in theory became reality under the pressure of grief and determination. Scientists who once dreamed of exploring the ocean's mysteries found their calling in tragedy. The same machines that sought a lost aircraft would later go on to discover shipwrecks, map tectonic plates, and even study climate change. From loss came knowledge, and from knowledge, progress. But the lessons were not only technical, they were deeply human. The disappearance of Flight 208 reminded the world that behind every flight number are faces, families, and stories. It exposed the emotional cost of uncertainty and the desperate human need for closure. Airlines began offering better support systems for families in times of crisis. Governments redefined how they communicate during disasters, realizing that compassion must accompany information. For investigators, it taught humility, a recognition that even the most advanced systems can fail, and that arrogance in safety is the greatest danger of all. There was also a spiritual lesson, one that cannot be measured in data or policy. The story of Flight 208 became a metaphor for the human condition, how easily we can be lost, and how hard we must fight to be found. It showed that progress means nothing without empathy. Across the world, the tragedy inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers who sought to make sense of the silence that followed the disappearance. Memorials were built not just as monuments of sorrow, but as symbols of hope, reminders that remembrance itself is a form of rescue. When people gathered by the ocean, lighting candles against the wind, they were not only mourning the past, but affirming life's fragile beauty. For the families, the legacy was written in perseverance. They had faced governments, storms, and endless nights of waiting, yet they never surrendered. Their strength became an example for millions, who saw in them the reflection of their own fears and hopes. They showed the world what it means to grieve with dignity and to turn pain into purpose. Many of them later became advocates for aviation safety, ensuring that the lessons paid for in their suffering would protect future travelers. Their voices shaped laws, their petitions drove reforms, and their memories became the conscience of modern aviation. Investigators, too, carried forward their lessons. They learned to see beyond the machinery, to look at each report as a human story. In classrooms and training centers, new generations of pilots and engineers studied the case of Flight 208 not as a mystery, but as a moral compass. It became a symbol of accountability, that the smallest overlooked detail could alter the fate of hundreds. In that way, every takeoff after the tragedy was a silent promise never again. The legacy extended beyond aviation. The search united nations that had once stood divided, proving that cooperation could transcend politics when humanity was at stake. Navies, scientists, and volunteers from every corner of the world had worked side by side, bound not by treaties but by compassion. The disappearance became a shared human event, teaching that empathy is not limited by borders. In an era often marked by division, Flight 208 reminded the world that tragedy can reveal what unites us more than what separates us. Years after the incident, when journalists revisited the story, they found that people still spoke of it, not only with sorrow, but with reverence. It had become part of collective memory, a chapter of history that carried warnings and wisdom. Schools taught about it in ethics and engineering classes. The footage of search ships battling impossible waves was archived as evidence of both scientific progress and human endurance. The haunting phrase, "lost without a trace," had been replaced by new language, one that spoke of resilience, innovation, and remembrance. Perhaps the greatest lesson was understanding the limits of control. Flight 208 proved that technology can fail, systems can break, and certainty can vanish in a moment. But it also showed that courage can endure, and truth can survive even beneath the deepest waters. It reminded the world that safety is not a state but a pursuit, one that demands vigilance, humility, and empathy. The ocean may have taken the plane, but it could not drown the determination of those who sought the truth. In the quiet that follows every tragedy, the world always faces a choice to forget or to evolve. Skyline Airways Flight 208 became the reason the world chose the latter. Its legacy lives in every improved radar, every safer cockpit, every pilot who carries both skill and heart into the sky. It lives in the families who refused to give up, in the investigators who turned grief into progress, and in the silent respect of every passenger who looks out the window at 30,000 feet and remembers that safety was written in sacrifice. The story that began with disappearance ended with discovery, not only of wreckage, but of humanity's unbreakable spirit. The sky that once seemed a place of fear became again a symbol of wonder. Flight 208, once lost, became eternal in memory and meaning. And somewhere over the vast ocean, where the sun meets the horizon, it feels as if the voices once silenced by tragedy now whisper through the wind, reminding us that nothing truly vanishes if it changes the world it leaves behind. The disappearance of Skyline Airways Flight 208 left a scar not only in aviation history, but in the collective consciousness of a world that believed it had conquered the skies. Yet from that tragedy emerged an enduring story of innovation, collaboration, and relentless pursuit of answers. The lessons learned went far beyond technology. They revealed the fragility of human systems and the resilience of the human spirit. In the months and years that followed, aviation authorities, engineers, and international agencies worked tirelessly to ensure that what had been lost would never vanish again. One of the most significant lessons concerned tracking and communication. Before the incident, planes relied heavily on radar coverage and intermittent communication with ground control. Flight 208 demonstrated the vulnerability of these systems, how a chain of failures could render an aircraft invisible, even in a connected world. In response, engineers designed real-time satellite tracking systems capable of monitoring planes continuously across oceans. Black boxes were enhanced to transmit crucial flight data periodically, ensuring that even in extreme circumstances, critical information could be accessed remotely. These innovations marked a turning point in aviation safety, reducing the risk of aircraft ever disappearing without a trace again. The disappearance also highlighted the unpredictable nature of the ocean. Search and rescue teams had to contend with currents that could carry debris thousands of miles, extreme depths that exceeded previous engineering capabilities, and harsh weather that made recovery operations perilous. The development of advanced deep-sea autonomous vehicles, capable of diving farther and withstanding immense pressure, became a direct result of the operation. These vehicles did not only serve aviation, but also opened doors for marine research, oceanographic exploration, and disaster recovery efforts. The technology born from tragedy became a tool for discovery, a testament to the way human ingenuity can turn loss into progress. International cooperation emerged as another key outcome. Governments that had historically operated in isolation or even competition came together in an unprecedented global effort. Naval fleets, scientific teams, and investigative agencies shared data and resources, creating a blueprint for transnational collaboration in emergencies. This cooperation extended beyond aviation, influencing disaster relief protocols, maritime search operations, and coordinated response strategies for natural and technological crises. Flight 208 had shown that the scale of certain challenges requires unity, and the response became a model for how humanity can tackle seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The human element, the emotional and psychological toll, also reshaped how airlines and authorities approach crisis management. Families of passengers faced months of uncertainty, living in a limbo that blurred the boundaries between hope and despair. Their struggle demonstrated the need for compassionate communication, timely updates, and psychological support. Airlines revised protocols, ensuring that loved ones would have access to information, counseling, and assistance in navigating the aftermath of tragedies. Investigators and search teams received training in managing the emotional weight of their work, acknowledging that while technical expertise is critical, empathy is equally essential in high-stakes operations. For the aviation industry, Flight 218 became a case study in risk management and resilience. It revealed the importance of redundancy, regular system audits, and contingency planning. Engineers examined every component, from cockpit electronics to mechanical systems, identifying vulnerabilities and implementing solutions. Airlines incorporated rigorous training to prepare pilots and crews for rare but catastrophic scenarios, emphasizing decision-making under pressure and the ability to respond to simultaneous system failures. The lessons extended to passengers indirectly, who benefited from improved safety protocols and technological advancements that made every flight more secure. Flight 208 also transformed public perception of aviation safety. Before the disappearance, flying was often seen as routine, even mundane. The event reminded the world that even the most advanced machines are subject to the forces of nature, human error, and unforeseen mechanical failures. Media coverage, documentaries, and educational programs highlighted not just the tragedy, but the rigorous investigative and technological efforts that followed. The public learned that safety is not static, it is continuously evolving, shaped by past experiences, scientific advancements, and relentless inquiry. Perhaps the most enduring lesson was philosophical, the balance between certainty and uncertainty. Flight 208 challenged the illusion that technology can solve all problems. It reminded humanity that even in a world dominated by satellites, computers, and global communication, nature and circumstance can assert themselves unpredictably. Yet it also demonstrated resilience, the ability of people, institutions, and technology to adapt, innovate, and persevere. The story became a metaphor for life itself, teaching that while loss is inevitable, the response, the determination to understand, to rebuild, and to improve, defines the legacy we leave behind. Memorials, educational programs, and safety initiatives now carry the imprint of Flight 208. Students in aviation schools study the case in depth, learning about technical failures, crisis management, and the importance of communication. Search and rescue teams worldwide have incorporated new training derived from the challenges faced during the operation. Engineers continue to innovate, using the lessons of the deep ocean and complex logistics to develop more resilient systems. The legacy of a single flight lost at sea has touched countless lives, transforming fear into knowledge and tragedy into lasting progress. Ultimately, the disappearance of Flight 218 served as both a warning and a catalyst. It highlighted vulnerabilities that had been underestimated, while simultaneously inspiring unprecedented cooperation, technological advancement, and human compassion. From the tragedy arose lessons in humility, perseverance, and innovation. The skies became safer, the oceans more explored, and the world more connected, proving that even in loss, humanity can find purpose. The story of Skyline Airways Flight 218 remains etched into the collective memory, not merely as a tale of disappearance, but as a testament to endurance and learning. Every improvement in aviation safety, every technological breakthrough in deep sea exploration, and every act of support for families of the missing carries the echoes of that flight. It is a reminder that even when tragedy strikes without warning, the human spirit, curious, compassionate, and unyielding, will always rise to meet the challenge. The legacy is not the loss itself, but what followed: vigilance, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to prevent history from repeating itself. Even after the wreckage of Skyline Airways Flight 208 was partially recovered and investigations concluded, the world remained captivated by its story. The disappearance had become more than an aviation mystery. It had transformed into a cultural phenomenon, echoing through films, books, news stories, and collective memory. The missing plane captured imagination in a way that few events in modern history ever had, symbolizing uncertainty, fear, and the fragility of human existence. People were drawn to it not simply because it was a technical puzzle, but because it was a deeply human story, one that touched on loss, hope, and the unknown. From the moment Flight 208 vanished, society became obsessed with explanations. Newspapers, magazines, and television networks dedicated hours of coverage, analyzing every possibility. Engineers, meteorologists, pilots, and investigators offered theories, each attempting to make sense of what seemed inexplicable. The public followed closely, their curiosity fueled by the tension between fact and speculation. Social media amplified the mystery, allowing individuals worldwide to contribute their own ideas, map hypothetical flight paths, and even recreate the final moments in simulations. This collective fascination turned the event into a shared cultural touchstone, one that transcended borders and languages. Filmmakers and writers drew inspiration from Flight 208, creating documentaries and novels that explored the human side of disappearance. These stories often focused not on technical failures, but on emotion. The anxiety of families waiting for news, the pressure on search teams battling the elements, and the moments of hope and despair experienced by all involved. By portraying the tragedy in a narrative form, the event gained a lasting presence in popular culture. It became a story told repeatedly, each retelling keeping the memory alive, reminding audiences that even modern technology cannot eliminate uncertainty. Flight 208 also became a symbol in art and education. Artists depicted the lost aircraft through paintings, sculptures, and installations, often highlighting the contrast between human ingenuity and nature's power. Memorials across the globe were not only a tribute to those who perished, but also a place for reflection on the limits of human knowledge. In classrooms, the disappearance was studied not just as an engineering case, but as a lesson in resilience, crisis management, and human behavior under uncertainty. Students learned about the psychological impact on families and investigators, as well as the technological innovations that arose from tragedy. The enduring mystery of the plane also sparked conversations about the unseen forces that govern life. Psychologists and sociologists noted how the story revealed humanity's relationship with the unknown, a mixture of fear, fascination, and the desire for closure. For many, Flight 208 represented the ultimate unknown, a reminder that despite our best efforts, the world remains vast and unpredictable. This made the plane a metaphor in cultural discussions for uncertainty, for the limits of control, and for the perseverance required to confront events beyond human comprehension. The fascination was not limited to adults or professionals. It permeated the imagination of children who grew up hearing the story. They were captivated by the mystery of the vanished plane, imagining hidden worlds beneath the ocean, heroic rescue missions, and the courage of those who searched. Educators often used the event to teach critical thinking, problem solving, and the importance of persistence. The narrative became a lens through which young minds could explore complex ideas about technology, nature, and human resilience. Internationally, Flight 208 influenced aviation protocols and media practices. News organizations became more cautious in reporting missing aircraft, balancing urgency with sensitivity. Airlines introduced enhanced crisis communication strategies, recognizing that public scrutiny would always be intense. The disappearance reinforced the importance of transparency and accountability. as the world had witnessed the consequences of delayed or incomplete information. Cultural memory and institutional change were intertwined, showing that a single tragic event could reshape both perception and policy. Perhaps most poignantly, the plane's story impacted families directly. Survivors' groups and advocates ensured that the legacy of Flight 208 would include recognition of emotional and psychological needs. Support networks developed, providing counseling and community for those affected by similar events. Memorial services and anniversaries became cultural rituals, moments where remembrance, grief, and solidarity converged. The vanished aircraft had transformed personal loss into communal memory, embedding itself into the rituals of society. Flight 208 also entered folklore in subtle ways. Stories of its disappearance inspired myths, documentaries blending fact and speculation, and even digital reconstructions of its final flight. People around the world debated what truly happened, creating online archives and interactive maps. The event became part of a larger dialogue about mystery, science, and human courage, showing how a single event can ripple across communities and generations. In many ways, it became a symbol for the human struggle to understand what cannot be fully known, a modern parable for uncertainty itself. Despite answers provided by investigation and partial recovery, the world continues to be drawn to Flight 208. Its mystery lingers in conversations, media, and cultural expression. Scholars, journalists, and enthusiasts revisit the case, analyzing decisions, technologies, and natural forces that contributed to its disappearance. Every documentary, podcast, or article keeps the narrative alive, illustrating that some stories endure precisely because they touch on universal human experiences: loss, hope, curiosity, and the unyielding desire to find truth. In the end, Skyline Airways Flight 208 became more than a vanished plane. It became a story about humanity's capacity to search, to endure, and to remember. It revealed both the limitations of technology and the boundless depth of human resolve. Through the grief of families, the determination of search teams, and the reflection of society, the plane achieved a form of immortality, not in the physical sense, but in memory, culture, and the ongoing dialogue it inspires. Its disappearance serves as a constant reminder that while we may never fully understand every mystery, the pursuit of knowledge, the commitment to care, and the resilience of the human spirit are truths that endure forever.